So in today's video, I'm going to be walking through how a student might plan a paper one response. So last video, I did a run through of a paper two paper. So that was the reading comprehension paper for Chinese B, SL. But today I'm going to be going through how you might plan a writing question from paper one. So in paper one, you're given 1 hour and 15 minutes to do one out of the three questions they give you for this new course. And so, for example, you're given a question like this, you read it, and then you're supposed to choose one out of these three text types to do, and there will be a correct text type. And if you want to know how to identify and write and know what things you need to do for a particular text type, then I'll put a video in the link below. That's one of mine, and I go through each and every one of the text types. So when you're doing a paper one, basically you're going to be writing out at most 480 characters, but you should be approaching that higher limit as you want to put more content in, which allows you to get not only language marks but message marks as well. So basically in the paper one, the three questions you're given could be out of any of the five themes that are tested in the course. So that could be social relationships, sharing the planet, science and technology, personal identity, and traditions and experiences. And in those themes, there can be subcategories which are tested upon. So since you're given 1 hour and 15 minutes, what I'd recommend doing in this time is for the first 5 to 10 minutes, I want you to actually plan your response. So jot down the key details that you need to include in your response, as well as stuff like what text type you want to use and any content you seem like you think you want to include in your response. So for example, if you're given one about Chinese New Year, your planning thing could be about okay, am I writing a diary, a report, and then writing down what you should include, am I comparing cultures, what aspects of Chinese New Year do I know? So for example, 红包, 饺子, 猪包, bao zhu, and all those other aspects of Chinese New Year. That's a quick example, but in this video, I'm going to go through an actual question that I was given in a test, and it was about online learning. So the reason I'm not going through how to writing the actual response up, it's because that's mostly dependent on your knowledge of characters, and it would be a way too long video. And in addition, I'm typing this up, which isn't reflective of the exam situation where you actually have to handwrite it. But planning, that's still more or less the same on a laptop as well as a paper you write on. So when you're reading a paper one question, you want to look for these four things. So number one, you have the context. So the context is basically what's being asked of me in this question. Oh, no, wrong one. Context is what's going on in this question and what's going on in the world that I sort of need to address in the world of the question per se. So in this example, if we read it, we have recently online learning, so 网上教育, online education, has become more and more popular or more and more a thing, a trend. So 越来越流行. So this is referring to how in our real life, online learning has become a normality for us because of COVID. And that's the context they want you to address. So for example, in your introduction of whatever text type you're doing, you can copy this sentence, which will briefly address it. But if you want to get those higher marks, you can say 最近网上教育越来越流行，因为新冠病毒的疫情，我们过疫情的事，所以我们需要做网上教育. So we have to do online learning. And that would be enough to address the context for your response in this example. And also in addition, for this question in particular, you can use COVID as one of your main body arguments in what are the positives of online learning. But I digress. So that's going to be your context, and you can briefly annotate upon it. And you can do your annotations in either Chinese or English, but since it's planning, you might as well use English to make so you can jot down a few more points and then you can translate from there. And this isn't the only evidence of context either. Another piece of context that's important for you answering the question is 你们中文班进行了讨论，探讨在线课堂. So the other part of context is your Chinese class is currently having a discussion. So this not only gives you like your target audience you need to address, so you're addressing young people, school students, what are the benefits and negatives of online learning for them. And that also tells you, sort of hints at what text type you're going to do, but I'll come back to that later. And then if we read the question further, 探讨在线课堂，远程教学带来的便利与静怡，以及网络课程是否能代替课堂教学，请说明你的立场。So the rest of this question talks about distance learning. We have yuan, which is far. So we have distance learning brings what conveniences, and I'm not entirely sure what these two characters mean, but because we're talking about conveniences and something else, you can either know this from previous knowledge, or you can deduce that because they're talking about the conveniences, it's also going to talk about the, say, negatives, the pros and cons, because the IB loves to compare both the positive side of something and the negative side of something too. And then the last clause of this question, which is extremely important, 以及网络课程是否能代替课堂教学, which means and whether or not 是否网络课程, so online learning, can replace 代替课堂教学, classroom learning. And then please explain your position. I've already talked about context being one of the four things, but the second thing is actually the issues being discussed. So what's being discussed in this question? And as we've read from here, it's talking about the conveniences and challenges of online learning. So it's talking about that, and also whether it can replace classroom learning. And basically, you're being asked to give your position on that. Now, immediately, this already gives away what text type you need to do, because if a question's asking you to give your position on, say, the pros and cons of something, and out of these three, we have 文章, an article, 演讲稿, a speech, or 辩论稿, a debate. Now, because debate's the only thing that sort of hints at the pros and cons, affirmative, negative, and like you have a specific position and argument, then 辩论稿is actually going to be a text type you're going to want to do. And that's because of 辩理. And then another thing I wanted to comment on is for text type, your context and your target audience. So because it mentions your Chinese class, now there's two ways of like starting a debate. For example, you have 尊敬的主席评委老师们同学们. You have the super formal way, which is like if you're doing a proper debate. But since you're having a informal classroom discussion, you don't need to have 尊敬的主席评委 in that. All you have to do is 老师同学们, because it's only a class, you're only addressing a teacher and your classmates, and you don't need to be super formal with that. And the final thing out of the four you need to spot is as my teacher likes to call them, possible solutions. So generally in the IB, if you're talking about an issue like, for example, pollution, you possible solutions could be like, okay, so what can we do to like play our part in trying to reduce pollution or trying to combat it. But in this case, you're not exactly given like something to solve, but rather because it's a debate, you need to be able to possible solutions is your main points on whether you're for online learning or against online learning, and also why it may or may not replace classroom learning. So in that case, that could be some arguments. For example, it's more convenient, or some people's internet speed might be slow, so it's inconvenient if you're arguing for the negative. And another point, and then for the last point, which is like arguing whether it can or cannot replace classroom learning, most people would argue no, it cannot replace online learning. And points you could discuss would be there's no face-to-face contact, so在线课没有跟老师面对面的沟通, so that's face-to-face contact. Now this is just rough planning, but if you want to see a possible plan of like, say, points you could include, then stick around because I will include that a bit later on. So basically, these are the main four things you're looking for in a question, and highlighting the question is also good as well because it'll just help you like spot the things, and also you need to keep these parts of the question in mind when writing your response, because a lot of people tend to forget they need to address every single part of this question. So for example, in that mock test I did with this question in particular, almost all of us, including me, forgot this last clause, which ended up losing us a lot of marks. So by planning, you sort of like learn to ingrain the key information from the question and it ingrains it into your plan, which then will ingrain it into your response if you follow your plan. Yeah, that's what I was meant to say. But anyway, these are sort of like the main small points you're just like trying to get out from the text. But if you're looking for like, if you're wanting to plan like your full text type, so for example, I'll just switch to an English keyboard to make things easier. So basically, if you're planning out your whole thing, you can include like intro. So right now, COVID. And I'm just doing my planning in English because it's a lot faster. But if you're comfortable with planning in Chinese in the exam, then feel free to go with it. But just remember, you only have 5 to 10 minutes before you need to start really getting into writing it. And I'm going a bit overboard, but that's because I'm commentating as I'm doing it as well. So if you're planning your whole thing out, then you should maybe have a little section of the paper where you just have your intro, main body, and then conclusion. So for example, my intro basically includes like addressing the context. Right now, COVID has forced us to do online learning. And then my team / side does or doesn't support online learning, or maybe not support, but say side team side's opinion or opinion / view is that online learning either has more conveniences, 便利, or more challenges, whatever this character is, I forgot. conveniences. And then you can say whether it can or cannot replace online learning. And for me, I choose that it has some conveniences, but it can't replace classroom learning. And if you want to look at the points I said in my main body, that could be explained by something like this. So for example, if you're arguing about like conveniences of online learning, you can say it's more convenient. So more convenient, you could say more relaxed, so and you'd have to elaborate more on these points. So for example, if you're talking about convenience, you could say you only need a phone or a device and you can look up plenty of information that can help you. Or you can say like 学生更放松，因为学生们可以自己安排时间，自己抽时间 so arrange time or make free time to do learning while maintaining their balanced life and that stuff. And then for like points where it's like it can't replace online learning, you could say there's a lack of face-to-face contact, and also like some students can't learn at home, they're easily distracted, so they're not used to this sort of learning. So you could say not used to this learning, that would be like 不习惯这种上课方式 and then 容易不专心等问题. So like it's students are easily to be like distracted or not focused and answering questions. And then your conclusion, you don't really have a for this example, you don't really have a conclusion in a debate because it's pretty stock standard. You basically say, according to the evidence above, my team agrees on this point, and then thank you everyone. So it's not too bad, but you could just include that. For example, any keywords you sort of need to remember, like 总上所述. Yeah. So although that wasn't really comprehensive, basically when you're approaching like planning your paper one response, you can basically focus on the four main things: context, issue, text type / target audience, and possible solutions. And if you want to go further into, if you want to do some further planning, you can structure it as like your intro, main body, and then conclusion. And even though this is pretty ghetto, and I know some of you, especially May 21, are almost about to do your exams, you need to feel free to discuss more of this with your teachers, as they should be the best source for consulting how you might approach your exams. But this is just a little quick guide, and for those doing exams right now, I wish you good luck. Thank you guys.